Good morning and welcome back to Wellbeing Wednesdays. I'm Shawna Foose, one of the therapists on staff at the Counseling Center, and I'm joined today by my co-host,
Dr. Jinaki Flint. I'm staff psychologist here at the Counseling Center, and we are joined by Dr. Dani Archie. He is also staff psychologist here, and he also acts as our gender and sexual diversity advocate here. Dr. Archie is here to discuss with us today about healthy LGBTQ relationships. Welcome, Dr. Archie.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Wonderful. We're recording this episode on August 27th, 2020, and we do want to take a moment to acknowledge that a major hurricane, Hurricane Laura, did strike Southwest Louisiana last night. And we just want to acknowledge the folks in our community who may have friends or loved ones there, and all the people in that region, and let them know that we're thinking about them. And we are here to provide support if you're struggling with any impact from that hurricane. We also want to let you know that we may have some technological glitches because it is stormy here as a result of that storm. So hang on with us, and we're going to make sure that we get all this wonderful content out to you. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it off to Dani now, and we're going to hear all about healthy LGBTQ relationships.
All right. Well, let me go ahead and share my screen with you guys. Let's see. How's that? Can you see my PowerPoint?
Sure can.
Yes.
All right, great.
Good.
So yeah, we're going to be talking about healthy relationships in general, but also kind of specifically some challenges that LGBTQ people face in forming healthy relationships. So to kind of get us started, we'll just kind of talk a little bit about some of the specific challenges that we face. So one is, LGBT people may not kind of develop their relationships in the same ways that others do. Part of that can be that, when you are 13, 14, 15 and starting to kind of date, you may, as an LGBT person, not be out. And so you may not have those same experiences that your peers had at a young age. And so by the time that maybe you get to college and are out and starting to explore, you're kind of maybe feeling a little bit behind. And so that can be a challenge of knowing what is healthy and what's not healthy in a relationship because of those kind of missing those early on experiences. LGBT relationships sometimes also develop in different ways. So for example, a lot of times LGBT people may not be able to kind of meet other LGBT people in their everyday life. And so a lot of times they may meet their partners online where others may not, or meet them through kind of referrals from friends, so to speak. And then there's maybe kind of different rates that LGBT people might develop their relationships at. There's kind of the joke in the community, and the joke is, what do lesbians bring to a second date? Have you guys heard this before?
No,
Yeah.
what?
A U-Haul.
And so that makes so much sense.
Yeah, and so the idea is, and there can be a lot of reasons for this, and one can be when you meet somebody, and again, because of the challenges we face in developing relationships, those relationships might develop very fast, and that can be a risk factor in a lot of ways. And so, there's these kind of different ways that relationships develop, and our kind of skills in relationships develop can cause these challenges in kind of knowing healthy relationships. I think another big part of that is a lot of times we grow up without seeing healthy relationships in our lives of people who are like us. So we don't see people in same-sex relationships in the media as often, or in our personal lives. And so it can be hard to know what our relationships might look like and how they might look different than cisgender and heterosexual relationships. Another big thing is sometimes, again, if you come from a background where you really haven't been affirmed in your identity, maybe you've been in the closet kind of feeling unsafe to come out, and you do finally come out, and maybe you experience a lot of rejection from family or friends in high school or your community. And so when you find someone who really affirms who you are and affirms your identity, it can be so exciting that it can be really easy to miss some of the red flags because you're just so excited to kind of have that affirmation that we all need. And then another challenge is those internalized phobias. So that internalized homophobia and biphobia and transphobia, society tells us we don't deserve better, and we can internalize that belief and believe that the abuse and things that we might experience is something that we deserve based on our identities. And so all of this kind of just creates these challenges that cishet people don't experience in developing relationships. So we'll talk a little bit about kind of the severe end of unhealthy relationships, where we talk about kind of intimate partner violence or domestic violence or abuse. It's important to recognize that LGBTQ individuals experience this at equal or higher rates compared to cisgender heterosexual people. And that can be a surprise for a lot of people, because there can be these stereotypes that same-sex couples don't experience intimate partner violence based on kind of stereotypes that men are abusers and women are the ones that are being abused. And so there's kind of this stereotype that leads to maybe people not recognizing that. And bisexual and transgender people are much more at risk. And so gay and lesbian people kind of experience intimate partner violence about the same rates as cishet people, but bisexual and trans people experience it at much higher rates. In particular, trans women and trans women of color and Black trans women in particular experience higher rates of violence. And there's an epidemic in our country and in the world at large of trans women being murdered, especially Black trans women. And most of these murders are committed by sexual or romantic partners. And so I think it's important for us to kind of recognize this increased risk that our communities face, and in particular are most at risk. And I think Black trans women are most at risk because they face transphobia, they face misogyny, they face racism. And so the kind of the combination of all of these oppressive factors put them at a very high risk.
So they have triple the risk just in terms of their intersections, of
Exactly.
being trans, of being Black, being female, and that really is, this is really a pandemic to me. Yeah. that this is happening. And there are a lot of people I know out there doing the work, but I think that there needs to be a louder call within all of the movements that are out today to bring much, much more attention to that piece in and of itself. Because if we lose one trans person, it is a problem.
Yeah.
And I just think that the voices need to have a wider reach and much more frequency on that. So thank you for highlighting that piece.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's important just to kind of as well, recognize as the kind of where we're at in our country as far as the violence that Black people experience on a regular basis as well. And so, again, when you add in those intersections, it compounds all of that violence and it becomes a large issue.
And I wonder about, trans students on campus, and how this kind of plays out as you are, the sense of safety is missing. And it's not just in your head, a sense of not being safe. It's not just like anxiety, it's real threat.
Yeah.
And so how then, as clinicians, do we care for those students?
Yeah.
And how do we outreach to them or engage them to let them know that there are some spaces that are relatively safe for them to come and process?
Yeah, I think that's very important. I think to kind of keep going, I think that another factor that creates this challenge that our community faces when we're talking about intimate partner violence is that these phobias, homo, biphobia, transphobia, can be used as a tool of abuse. And so, for example, partner might attack your identity. And so, for example, a trans person that is in a relationship with a cisgender person They might use transphobia as a way to deny the person's identity, and so kind of continually misgender them and use that almost as a form of punishment in a way, and as a way to control. There's can be also this really pressuring a person to be out or threatening to out a person. And so that's kind of using the phobias that we face every day in the world, and kind of using that as a threat against a person. Isolating a person, controlling their expression and kind of their gender and things like that. So there's a lot of ways that these kind of systemic societal factors could then be turned personal and used in a way as a form of violence. And then on top of that, we also face kind of unique barriers to seeking help. A big part of that can be a lot of shelters may not be friendly for LGBT people. Part of that can be sometimes they're run by religious communities that have kind of anti-LGBT views, and so it's really unsafe. Trans people especially might not have anywhere to go, because a lot of times that these shelters might be just women's shelters, and because of transphobia, trans women might not be welcome in these shelters. And so that can be a big barrier. Not being out, right? So if you are in a same-sex relationship and you are being abused and you're not out, who do you go to talk to and get help without outing yourself? And maybe that feels also dangerous at that point. There's also sometimes I think this pressure to not make our community look bad. And so there can be this, if I talk about this other LGBT person as being abusive, that everyone's going to think that's how we all are, right? And so there can be this need to kind of hide what's going on because you don't want to make your community look bad. There can also be this feeling of worry that people outside of the community might blame what's happening to you on your identity, right? And so if you weren't trans, then people wouldn't treat you this way, right? You wouldn't have this experience. And so who do you go for help when you're just going to be blamed for what's happening? And there's enough victim blaming when we look at intimate partner violence, but having that extra layer just creates these extra barriers. So kind of all of these barriers kind of create this environment that puts LGBT people more at risk. And so it makes sense when we talk about that we experience higher rates in some ways. It's because we have these barriers in place. So I want to talk next a little bit about just kind of what we're talking about when we're talking about abuse and intimate partner violence. And this violence that we're talking about is really about power and control. It's about trying to control another person. It's not about having an anger management problem. It's not about losing control. It's really about taking control. And there's a lot more to it than just physical violence. A lot of people think of physical violence as being what abuse is, but if you can kind of see in this wheel here, there's all of these different factors that are kind of spokes to the wheel that then support this bigger issue of violence, but sexual and physical violence. But then when we're talking about the LGBTQ community, we also have kind of this larger societal level of this wheel, which is the homophobia, biphobia, and transphobia we experience in society. And so all of those factors kind of together form this environment that creates this one person having power over another. And so some of these spokes, we can kind of look at them, and again, these are things that cis people can experience as well, but trans and queer people experience them in a bit different ways and kind of other layers on top of it. So for example, using emotional abuse. So abuse can also be not just physical or sexual, but emotional. And again, that can be some of the things we talked about already, is the misgendering or blaming the person's identity or threatening to out them, things like that. Isolation is a big factor. And the reason isolation is a big factor in intimate partner violence is because it's one way to get control over a person. If you can isolate them from their other supports, then they become dependent on you. And that dependence creates an environment where you can kind of have power over the person. So some ways that plays out for LGBT people is maybe controlling the person's access to the community. And so sometimes that can look like even threatening to make you look bad among the LGBTQ community. And so if you try to kind of speak out and get help, then you're going to lose all of your friends, and that can be really difficult. Biphobia can be used in a way. So for example, a bisexual person who's in a relationship with someone that's heterosexual, their heterosexual partner might say, oh, you can't be friends with these people because you might want to, have sex with them, and using kind of jealousy in that way. But then there's also kind of, it can be when there's two LGBT people that are dating each other, that can be maybe this us against the world attitude. And so that can be used in this negative way to isolate. So what I mean, this us against the world is again, because the world can be so unwelcoming and harmful to us. It's kind of like, let's bond together against the homophobia that we experience. But that can cut out a lot of supports and a lot of positive people in someone's life.
Did you put this wheel together?
I did not. No, this is a well-known kind of way of looking at abuse. And so this is a particular one that focuses on LGBT people, but there's ones that are kind of for a broader looking at people as well as other kind of special ones. And this one I think is important because the original power and control wheel kind of looks at really just men abusing women. And again, we know that that's not how it always works, right? And so this kind of really takes out a lot of the gendered language and kind of acknowledges that.
I think this also helps to understand abuse comes in a lot of forms. It's not just physical. It's not even just words. The emotional side isn't just spoken words. There's so much of this that's in behavior and action that's keeping the power differential of one partner over the other. I think it really does shine a light on all the ways that can happen.
Yeah,
that's true. And how subtle it is.
Yeah.
It can be so subtle, almost as if you thought of it yourself. Right? Yeah. Especially the one with we're in this together. And then by the time you realize that you've been isolated and manipulated, it's almost kind of too late. You're kind of trapped emotionally, mentally, as well as physically.
I think that then plays into self-blame too, right? Like, this is
shame.
Me. I got myself in this, or the shame side of it. And then it feels even harder to identify that this is power and control.
Yeah. I think some other ways that this can look that people may not always recognize is sexual abuse. And a lot of times people don't even think about sexual abuse happening between partners that are in a relationship together. But it really can. And for LGBT people, this can look like using gender stereotypes or stereotypes about the community to kind of coerce people into sexual acts they're not comfortable with. So for example, one partner being the more masculine partner, then being expected to be the top, when maybe that's not what they would want. And so kind of using these gendered stereotypes as a way to control and coerce people into things. And again, I think the part of the denying and the minimizing can go back to those ideas that women cannot be abusive and men can't be abused, and as well as with rape and things like that. And so that can be a way to kind of deny what's happening and minimize what's happening. Financial, this can be, LGBT people are more at risk of having identity theft because it's easier to steal someone's identity when you're of the same gender. There can also be, gender roles, and using those as a way to coerce one person to spend more money. So you need to be the one to pay more because you're more masculine and things like that, and using that kind of unfair, outdated gender roles to kind of create that. So I think it's important to recognize that there's this broad kind of picture that's going on, and all of these factors kind of work together to create this environment where one person has kind of control over another.
This is powerful information.
Yeah. I think this is, another really powerful thing to recognize is kind of this cycle that happens in abusive relationships. And I think a lot of times people will, not maybe kind of recognize that what's going on is circling round and round. Because what can happen is there can be this honeymoon period is what we kind of talk about, where after some abusive incident, the abuser will be very sorry and ask for forgiveness and make big promises and say all these ways that they're going to change, and the person will believe them, and there's been this maybe positive in the relationship, and so there can be like, yes, wanting to see that kind of the person make those changes, and so the victim can then kind of agree to stay and set up appointments even for the abuser, and feels kind of happy and hopeful that things are going to get better. And then kind of the next phase is this tension building phase. And so at this phase, the abuser starts to kind of get more negative. And so it maybe not kind of the explosions that occur during the kind of larger abuse incidents, but kind of just the negative picking and threatening, criticizing, and kind of tearing a person down. And so in this stage, the victim is often kind of trying to prevent things getting kind of building even further. And so trying to calm the person down and taking care of and nurturing the abuser. But then this tension building ultimately, again, leads to another explosion. And this is where the kind of more violent, physical violence can happen. And then this kind of all these factors are kind of kept going again by this denial and this minimizing of what's happening. And this cycle can happen over and over. And what a lot of victims will kind of say is that the time between these stages gets shorter and shorter the longer the relationship goes on. And that honeymoon phase in particular gets smaller and smaller. And that's because the abuser now has more and more power, right? They've kind of got that control even more. And so there can be that shorten of that phase. So I think
it's much more confident that you're not gonna leave or actually do something because they've kind of got you in that trap.
Yes. And so I think it's important to kind of recognize, again, not only are there, when we're talking about intimate partner violence, there's a lot more to it than just the physical violence. But I think it's also important to recognize that there's a cycle happening. And so even though things may feel okay right now, that doesn't mean that it's going to stay okay. And that likely what's going to happen is this cycle is going to continue.
I think that's such a difficult thing to look at when you're in a relationship, when it feels good and it feels so good.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's so hard to acknowledge the bad parts of the cycle and try to hold on to the hopeful parts.
Yeah.
It's really difficult.
Yeah, it can be really hard. So next, kind of what I wanted to talk about is kind of preventing getting into this place. And I think being able to recognize some red flags in relationships early on can be really important to kind of avoid kind of getting yourself trapped in one of these situations. So these are just some red flags, and some of them are apply to everyone, and some I think are specific to LGBT people. And the specific types of abuse that we face. So one can be a big power imbalance. So this can be, someone who has a position of authority over you, like a teacher or a boss. And that power imbalance already set up going into the relationship kind of creates the situation where all this power and control that we've been talking about can be set up easier. Another big red flag is trying to move the relationship along too quickly. Now, I already kind of talked about how sometimes that can happen in LGBT relationships, but I think that kind of being aware of that and things moving quickly can be a red flag because, there can be this need to kind of become very, very close. And then the more close that you have, and then again, coupled with isolating from other relationships that you have, kind of puts you in a place of being at risk. The next one, a lot of people may not realize that as a red flag because it can seem like a good thing, but someone is constantly kind of telling you how perfect you are or putting you on a pedestal. It can be this almost like buttering you up, right? And making you feel very comfortable and good. But if a person doesn't know you that well, it's early on in a relationship and they're telling you how perfect you are, that can be a big red flag, because it's like, how do they know you that well to know all that, right? And it can be a way of kind of, again, setting the stage to take control. Describing all their exes as crazy. So this can be, again, this pattern that abusers have of minimizing their abuse and blaming their partner for the abuse. And so calling their partners crazy is a way to kind of blame them for what's happened to them. Feeling like you have to walk on eggshells. So being able to kind of trust your gut in some situations and realize that, okay, if you feel like you've got to be very careful and tread lightly, or the person might kind of blow up or get really, really angry, and knowing that kind of feeling early on can kind of recognize that, okay, this is maybe an unhealthy situation for me. Again, part of that, this next one is about that isolation. Like if you're feeling fearful of telling people about them, maybe check in about why that is. What's going on that, are you having this fear that your friends are going to judge this relationship? And sometimes it's important to kind of check with that and wonder why that is. And what are the things about the relationship you fear that they might judge, because they might be some accurate things. And again, I think this is where it becomes really, really complicated for LGBT people who might not be out, right? And so you might want to keep the relationship a secret because you're not wanting to out yourself. You're not ready to do that. And that can be really kind of a scary place to be. But I think there's also, another kind of layer here is in particular for trans people. And that trans people, if the person doesn't want to disclose that they're with you, then is it because they've got some transphobia, right? That they don't want other people to know that they're dating a trans person, and so they're wanting to keep things a secret for that reason. And if that's kind of what's going on, that's really showing this person doesn't affirm who you are and value who you are. And so that can be kind of a really scary place to be as well. Some other red flags, expecting you to kind of drop everything for them. So again, them wanting to be kind of number one priority all the time, not respecting your other relationships, and is, again, part of that isolating you from others. They expect to, and not only just isolating from people, I think another part of the isolation can be isolating from the other things that are important to your life, right? So like sometimes in abusive relationships, if people are asked to stop doing their hobbies, or the abuser might kind of cause scenes at their work, right? And cause problems for them at work. And it's just another way to isolate them, not just from people, but from those important things. They don't respect your time, space, belongings, or privacy. So privacy is a huge one. I think a lot of times people will overlook that, but if they're, demanding to have access to your phone, especially not letting you have any access to theirs, and not letting you have anything that's yours, again, that's a form of control. And that can be, a lot of times people maybe overlook that early on and, they just, are jealous or things like that. But that's really not a healthy sign. Now, these next ones are specific, again, to LGBT people. So, not respecting who you are. So again, if someone is misgendering you or using not your correct name or pronouns, shows that they really don't respect who you are. They might also kind of criticize how you express your identity and tell you that, okay, you're not a real lesbian unless you do this. Or, criticizing, being a gay man and being too feminine, and then, wanting you to be more masculine, and kind of criticizing how you express your gender. And so kind of having those negative views of who you are and how you express yourself can be a sign that this is not going to be a healthy relationship. But then there's this kind of other layer where people might fetishize your identities. And what this kind of means is really turning your identity into something sexual when it's maybe not, right? And really kind of reducing you to a sexual object as opposed to a whole person. And so, for example, sometimes like heterosexual men who are in relationships with bisexual women, they might kind of fetishize that and see it as hot or things like that. But really what that means is, because a lot of times they'll be like, sure, you can, make out with a woman, but not with a man, right? Well, what that's saying is that they don't value women, two women being in a relationship, right? That it doesn't count. So two women having sex doesn't count. And so it's not cheating. And basically that's a huge devaluing of your identity. And so that can be kind of one way that can look. I think trans people face a lot of fetishization. And so this can be people just kind of really focusing on certain body parts and having expectations about what how a trans person is going to have sex based on their fantasies, not based on the trans person themselves and the kind of sex that they want to have. And so I think that's kind of an important thing to kind of realize is this person kind of seeing you as a whole person and respecting your identity, your body, how you want to express yourself, or they kind of turns you into a fantasy of theirs. And I think that's, again, kind of what I said at the beginning of sometimes it's hard to recognize that's happening because it feels so good to be affirmed, right? And so if someone is, maybe you experience a lot of transphobia and a lot of rejection in dating because people don't want to date you because you're trans, and it's here's this person that does want to date you. But maybe what's going on and their motivations aren't so great, and it might be hard to kind of pick that apart. So I think that's kind of a challenge that that trans people in particular face. So all of these, again, are just, and there's other red flags, but these I think are some important ones to kind of think about when you're kind of early on in relationship, getting into a relationship. And these are some signs that, okay, you're headed in not so healthy of a direction.
Yeah. I think that this is even more of this makes this even more emergent for people to find affirming spaces to do their work.
Yeah.
To be able to just process and do do the work around and find safety within your own body to use it as the resource. And you have to be in affirming spaces to do that. Yeah. Absolutely. I'll just jump in here and say, somehow my pronouns got knocked off of my name. When you said that, I looked at it, I was like, oh. So, yeah. So I'll get with Shawna to see how to put them up permanently.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that this totally speaks to the urgent need for there to be really affirming spaces to be able to do that emotional wellness work.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And I think that it's really important, I think, as an LGBT person to find one community, right? Like find community with others and outside of just a partner, right? That you need more than that. But then again, also, yeah, finding these spaces with people that can help you kind of work through some of these and recognize some of this when it's happening. Because sometimes it can be really hard to on your own.
And we are going to talk about some of those spaces and communities at the end of the presentation.
Yes, yes.
We are.
So, so I think I threw in a slide here about kind of using dating apps. And again, I thought that was important for our conversation because like I mentioned at the beginning is a lot of times LGBT people turn to dating apps to meet others because it can be hard for us to meet people. So I think just some basic tips, and there's lots of other tips out there, but these are just a few. I think a really good one is to set a boundary early on in your interaction, and maybe it's just a small boundary, but set that boundary and notice how the person responds. Because if they don't respect that boundary early on, they're probably not going to respect boundaries once you're in person with them, right? And so that can just be a thing of like, oh, I can't meet today. And if someone's like, no, let's meet up right now, then that's a good sign of like, okay, when I meet up with you, what's going to happen, right? And so I think kind of really recognizing those small boundary violations as kind of red flags for further violations. I think another important thing is that remember consent to some things doesn't mean you consent to others. Like this can be even an issue of just like being on an online app. Sometimes people think that, okay, because you're on this app, it means you consent to nude pictures or sexual messages being sent to you. And really people use these apps for lots of reasons. They may use them to hook up, but they might also make other connections. And so just being in that space doesn't mean you consent to that. And so that can be another red flag of someone kind of forcing sexual content on you before you've kind of laid the groundwork of that's what we're going to do.
And I would also add that consent can be revoked at any time. So you might have consented to something and then decided you don't want to do that anymore, and you can take that consent, you know, so it's not this like contractual agreement. It's your consent to give and to revoke.
Yeah. And I think it's important to recognize that that's true about your consent, but also the other person's consent.
Yeah, for sure.
And that, giving that space for other people to say, you know, I thought I wanted to do this, but I'm not so sure. And to kind of respect that.
Yeah.
You know, you might think about when meeting up for the first time, if it's someone you don't know, and again, you're meeting online, taking some certain precautions. So that can be things like telling your friends where you're going, and that you're going to check in at a certain time. And if you don't check in, you know, then they can raise the red flag of, okay, we need to do something about this, right? You know, getting pictures of the person before meeting them, so that you know who they are. And there's ways to kind of protect yourself to make sure that it's actually them in the picture. So you could say, hold up, you know, 3 fingers and send me a picture, and you know they've taken it right then, right? And so, you know, meeting in a public place, meeting as a group with your friends and their friends. These are all kind of precautions that you can take. Meeting in a place that feels safe for you. And so I think it says, again, when you're meeting someone who's a stranger online, it can be kind of unnerving. And so kind of having some, you can't always protect yourself 100%, but taking some extra steps can be something that can help you feel a bit safer. And then again, I think for trans people, this can be a whole long conversation, so I'm not going to go into this, but I think it's important to at least mention that trans people have this extra layer of, do we disclose our identity as a trans person? And if so, when? And if so, how? You know, and I know lots of trans people that will ask, what's best to do? Is it best to put it on my profile? Is it best to tell them in conversation? Is it best to tell them in person? And I don't think there's the best, but I think that it's helpful to think about the pros and cons and decide for yourself what feels best for you. And that know that you don't have to disclose unless you want to, and that's really your choice. And so this can be a bigger conversation to have with maybe other trans people in your life or other trusted people to kind of help you process through that. But I think that's something to keep in mind. So last, you know, we've been talking a lot about, you know, unhealthy relationships and what those look like. And I just kind of wanted to end with, what are some characteristics of healthy relationships? And so mutual respect of boundaries, you know, been talking about that violating boundaries. So you being able to respect their boundaries, them respecting yours is kind of a basis there. This next one, taking responsibility for your own behaviors and emotions. So again, if we go back to the power and control, there can be this blaming, right? And this minimizing what's happening and blaming the other person. And so each person should be able to say, this is, you know, I did this, I'm responsible for this, but also our emotions, which I think is a bit harder. And so, for example, sometimes people maybe feel insecure in a relationship, and they then turn that insecurity or that jealousy and put it on their partner, and it's their partner's job to make them feel better, right? And so they expect their partner to not go out with their friends because they're feeling jealous about it. So taking care of your own emotions and responsibility of your own emotions means that you need to have people to help support you. You need to have skills to manage and soothe yourself when you're upset, and that you can't put that all on another person. Doesn't mean your partner doesn't support you, but it means that it's not their responsibility. Honesty, trust, compromise, all important things. Individuality, I think, is an important one to kind of flesh out. And so this, you should have an identity outside of this relationship, right? Each person should. It doesn't mean that there isn't kind of a shared identity that you have in the relationship as well, but you need to have some things that about yourself that are separate from this other person. And I think that prevents this dependency on each other, and that's really important. Good communication, which, you know, I think that not everyone has great communication skills. I think that's something that we work with all the time, I think, in our therapy sessions, is helping people learn kind of communication skills, as well as like how to fight fair and to problem solve. And I think one way I always like to frame it for people is, are you seeing the issue as one partner against the other partner, or are you seeing it as two partners against the problem, right? And if how you kind of frame what the challenges that you're dealing with or the conflict you're having in the relationship can make a big difference. A healthy sexual relationship, which again is that goes back to that respecting boundaries and then not being coerced. But I think it's also important to recognize that not all romantic relationships are sexual as well. And so, for example, asexual people may not want to have sex, that may not enjoy it, and that's okay. And so just because you don't have a sexual relationship doesn't mean you can't have a healthy romantic relationship. And so I think that, again, that recognizing that, because people might try to coerce you in certain ways to do things you're uncomfortable with, and that saying that that's what a relationship is, and it isn't always.
Mm-hmm. I think going back to the fighting fair part,
yeah.
That accepting that relationships will have conflict, right? It's not, there's no relationship that just doesn't have an argument or a conflict, but really learning how to approach those in that way you described, Dani, of, you and me against the problem instead of you and me against each other, I think is really important for people to learn as they progress through relationships.
Yeah,
that is true. I loved hearing that again, because that is if I think if more people truly understood that the problem itself is the unifier.
Yeah.
And that I think that it totally changes perspective when you see it as something outside of yourselves that's presenting an opportunity for you to gain interconnectedness, to be bonded together, and also crossing over into the healthy sexual relationship or lack of. I think that what often gets missed is this is intimacy. People often kind of misconceive intimacy as sex.
Yeah.
Right. And they don't, and it's harder to have intimate relationships, I would imagine, like, especially just thinking about everything that I've heard, it's terribly unsafe to try to build intimate relationships. But if you're in one that meets kind of these needs, then a development of intimacy then can really be more powerful than any sexual relationship, oftentimes, because that's a whole nother level there. So I totally I get that.
Yeah,
these are great.
Yeah. So, and again, there's lots of others we could mention and name, but I thought, like, giving us a few to talk about it. And I wanted to lastly just kind of provide some resources, because I think everything that we talked about today, we could have gone into so much more depth. And so this was just kind of touching on some different topics about kind of relationships and for LGBT people. And so let's kind of I'll go through these. The top one is a resource specifically for domestic violence or intimate partner violence that for LGBT people. So they have kind of a hotline that you can call, as well as a website. The Trevor Lifeline is a lifeline for LGBT people. It's a suicide hotline, but also they have resources for intimate partner violence as well. And so it's a hotline you can call if you're kind of experiencing some of the things that we talked about today and wanting to know some resources. The next one is another hotline. This isn't specific to LGBT people, but I think it's the Rape, Assault, Incest something network. But they kind of work with sexual violence, and so that's another hotline to call to get some support. The next one is a trans-specific organization looking at violence and relationships. Love and Respect is a website that has lots and lots of information about healthy and unhealthy relationships that you can look at. They have some specific to LGBT people, but also just general things as well. The next is just kind of a post of some information about domestic violence in our community and what that looks like, if you wanted to kind of read more and see some of the statistics. And then that last one, I think, is a helpful file that is put together by a lawyer and talks about kind of your rights as an LGBT person who might be experiencing violence. And so I think that can be a helpful thing to look through if you're in that situation. And then finally, we kind of can talk about the counseling center, and that we are definitely here to help. And this can be from kind of just wanting to learn more about some of the stuff that we've talked about of how to have these healthy relationships, that build those communication skills. Maybe you're having some conflict in your relationship and you want to be able to communicate better. But also, again, if there is some kind of severe violence and things going on and you need some help, you know, you can come start with us, and we're definitely here to kind of help work through these issues. And then also wanted to talk about the Office of Gender and Sexual Diversity on campus. They do a lot of programming for the LGBT community, as well as can connect you with student groups and things like that. And kind of like I mentioned earlier, having community is huge, right? And so if you're maybe newly out and don't maybe know many other LGBT people, being able to connect with others can be really huge, as kind of being able to have this network and safety network, and not kind of find yourself so isolated. Any others or anything else you guys wanted to add to that?
I think we have a couple of groups through the counseling center that can also be helpful for finding that community level of support, but in an environment that's facilitated by a clinician.
Yes.
So we have the LGBTQIA group that you run, right, Dani?
Yes. Yeah, me and Karen.
Speak to that, Dani.
Yeah, so this group is called Building Queer and Trans Resilience, and it's a group for LGBT people as well as questioning people. And so it's really about kind of building up your strength as an LGBT person, because we all have to face kind of challenges in society. So today we talked about the challenges we have in our relationships, but like every level of society, we face these barriers. And so being a more resilient person can help us protect us against some of the negative factors that we experience. So that's kind of the group that I run with Carrie, one of our other therapists here.
Awesome.
Yeah, and so if you're interested in a group like that, or in individual therapy with anyone at the counseling center, you can call that number 504-314-2277. And in most cases, you'll get a same day appointment with one of our staff. And you can ask specifically about those groups. You can use that appointment to inquire about group or individual work, and we'll get you connected so that you can find your way into the safety of that community.
Yes. Yeah. So we are here. There are people here, who are in the community, engaging, offering the support.
Yeah, and I think, we have to remember, we understand that being in the LGBTQ community can be feel isolating on its own. And we're in a pandemic where we're social distancing and we're isolating on purpose.
Yeah.
And so adding those layers and those intersections, I think, really can compound that isolation. And we want to make sure that we're reaching out and connecting, because, in a lot of ways, that's the remedy is, even if you have to connect over Zoom, it's still connecting.
Yeah.
And let's not forget, all of that is happening as you're trying to navigate college and coursework, and maybe you're in some organizations, and and just managing that work-life balance of it all in this time can be challenging, can be a huge challenge. So the point here is that you are not alone.
Yeah, right. Right. And all of the clinicians in the counseling center, we're versed in understanding lots and lots of facets of diversity. And there are people like Dr. Archie who have specific expertise. And so, you can really get that support here.
Definitely. Well, Dr. Archie, we are so happy to have you join us today. This information is some very powerful stuff. And some great advice. I'm sure people will be healed by it. And if not healed, at least informed. Yeah. We are looking forward to having you back with more programming around LGBTQ as an area of focus. And we are thankful that you are here to support this community and to help us to support this community with information and education.
Indeed. I learned something today. I always do whenever you present. So I'm really grateful. Thank you for that.
Thank you guys for having me.
Always exciting.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad to be here and be able to speak on this topic. And you guys are great hosts. So thanks so much for having me.
Thank
you. All right.
So
everybody remember to tune in every Wednesday for the next episode. Next week's episode will feature our entire community engagement force. And we'll be talking about all the ways that we're bringing a focus to our community engagement. So be sure to look for that next Wednesday. In the meantime, everyone be well, be safe, and we will see you next week. Goodbye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.